plans for Shannon in Ireland today and in days to come. The first thing we're going to do is see a film that was put together with Tarak Kauff and Ken Meyer, and I think you probably have heard a little bit about their what they did, but Ken's not, his voice is going pretty bad. So Tarak, would you just give us one or two sentences about what you did, because the film assumes you know exactly what the act was, and I think it will be better if they know what you did.
I turned it on.
There you go.
Yeah, okay. This is a 14-minute film done by a fellow named Rob Whelan. It's an Afri production. Claire Daly is in it. Ed is in it. Myself.
I want you to tell them what you did to be arrested and why. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get that. Okay, sorry. What we did was we came here in the middle of March on St. Patrick's Day. The night before St. Patrick's Day, we found out that there was an Omni aircraft that had landed at Shannon, and we were sure that it was carrying U.S. troops and their weapons on their way to Kuwait, specifically. We had that information. Ken and I decided to make our way onto the airfield to inspect the plane, which is something that the Irish government is supposed to do, and they haven't. Not since 2001, when something like 3 million U.S. troops have gone through Shannon with their weapons to wage war in the Middle East and continue the process of destroying the world that the U.S. military has been involved in. So we did make our way onto the airport that morning, and we made our way towards the Omni aircraft plane. After about 20 minutes, the Garda came and stopped us and held us, and we were taken to Shannon jail, where we spent the night. We didn't expect to spend the next 7 months in Ireland, but after spending that night in Shannon jail, we were sent to Limerick prison, where we spent the next 12 days until we went to the High Court to see if we could get bail. And we did get bail at the High Court, 2,500 euros each, but they took our passports, and we are supposed to stay away from any airport in Ireland. Stay away, we don't know how far, but stay away was what it was on the bail conditions. So we have been here since then, which is getting close to 7 months now. We cannot leave the Republic, but I want to say that the Irish people have been so incredibly supportive and hospitable to us that we'll be grateful for this experience forever, and grateful to the Irish people, not to the Irish government, which is really betraying the will of the people, which, as you know,
okay, Tarak, we got it. Okay, all right. Let's start the film.
I don't know how much you wanted me to.
No, I just wanted to tell you.
Okay,
I wanted them to know what you exactly did, because the film assumes you know.
Could I add a note?
Yes. Yes, of course.
It is alleged that we cut away through the fence to get onto the airport, and it is also alleged that Tarak took obscene pleasure in cutting the fence.
The Irish government has not inspected one U.S. plane since 2001. So there's something like 3 million military personnel and their weapons, and also prisoners that were kidnapped and sent to be tortured, that have gone through Shannon Airport, that have just stomped all over Irish neutrality in the worst possible way, making Ireland legally complicit in war crimes. What's the excuse for that? Because the U.S. says, no, there's no weapons on board? You're taking the word of the United States?
the U.S. military is using this civilian airport essentially as a U.S. base. The result of that is death and destruction throughout the Middle East and North Africa. I find it particularly heartrending that some of this material goes to support the Saudi attacks in Yemen, where there are over 1 million people on the verge of starvation. And after what Ireland has been through in the 19th century in terms of starvation, I find it particularly tragic, bitterly ironic, that Ireland should be complicit in the starvation of over 1 million people.
So our central motivation was to not be silent. We feel that we have an obligation as veterans and, more importantly, as human beings to take a stand against the murder. Children are being killed every day by U.S. airstrikes and by U.S. militarism and the wars that they're waging in 14 countries right now. So children are dying. And if you have children, or if you have grandchildren, whatever, and you love people, you can't just sit by silently and permit this to happen. And that means something as a human being, to have the integrity to not be silent in the face of this brutality, in the face of this murder and destruction. I don't want my daughter to ask me years from now, Daddy, what did you do? You were a veteran. You were part of this murderous machine. Did you do anything? I don't want anybody to ask me that.
Well, we were aware of the fact that Ireland has an official neutrality policy since 1939. As veterans, having participated in the American imperialist venture and opposing it strongly, we felt it would be particularly valuable to encourage the Irish government to enforce their neutrality policy and stand up to Uncle Sam and set an example for the rest of the world that they don't have to play ball with our murderous policies and could really resist effectively. We felt that it would be necessary to make it more visible to the Irish public, as well as the American public, that this neutrality policy exists and is being regularly violated.
I was in the U.S. Army, 101st Airborne Division, which are paratroopers. We're trained to kill, we're trained to war. In fact, my division did exactly that in Vietnam. I was lucky I got out before I would have been sent to Vietnam, and I'm very happy about that. I didn't want that on my conscience, because both of us have so many friends who suffer on a daily basis from the guilt that they feel from participating in wars like Vietnam, Iraq. And this is one of the reasons why you have 22 veterans a day in the United States that are committing suicide, because they can't live with what they did. It's guilt. We call it moral injury. I don't want our guys to suffer, and I don't want the women and children and civilians who die and get their lives destroyed and torn apart to suffer either. But we have to do something so that we don't become apathetic, become silent. And it's important, and I think if enough people do that, it sets an example. And we feel good about doing it. I don't feel bad that we were in prison for 13 days. I would do it again and again.
Yeah, I served 8.5 years on active duty in the Marine Corps. And when I entered, of course, I was an idealistic young man who believed that the United States was a force for good in the world. And over the succeeding 8.5 years, the Marine Corps showed me that quite clearly the United States was not a force for good around the world. Half of that 8.5 years I spent in the Far East. The very last part of it, I was briefly in Vietnam. I saw what we were doing there. That's why I resigned my commission at the end of 1966 and went back to graduate school to try to figure out how the United States had gone so far off the rails. And I've been involved in this kind of peace work ever since 1966.
We're coming back one way or the other, and we want to come back for trial. It wasn't the Irish people, because most of the people, I think, are not in favor of the U.S. military abusing Irish neutrality. I think the system made a real mistake in putting us in prison, because I think we did some good work in prison. We talked to people and we shared things with other people. We felt it was a positive experience, but that doesn't make it right. They really had no right to put us in prison for 13 days without bail.
We told them very clearly that we want to come back for trial. That's part of the reason we came, was for opportunities to make visible this travesty that goes on at Shannon with the government ignoring their obligations under the Hague Convention, which has specific obligations for neutral countries.
The treatment of Tarak and Ken and the decision of the judge to deny them bail really represents a ratcheting up of the situation by the Irish state. Here we have two elderly, principled veterans who would have a very high standing in the United States and indeed would be a big topic of conversation in Ireland should the state take any action against them. So instead of allowing the case go to trial and have the publicity around that, we had the judge denying them bail, which is an absolute violation of human rights as far as I'm concerned. It's an appalling treatment of them to take their passports now and effectively almost intern them in Ireland because they can't go home. They're denied a right to earn their livelihood here, presumably, and they're away from their families and friends in the older years of their life. They could be here for a year before this case is addressed, which is truly shocking. And we can say that with certainty because some of the other cases of people who have done what the lads tried to do have taken that long to process. I think if you compare it to the likes of the treatment that myself and Mick Wallace got when we did essentially the same thing to try and exercise our public duty, as we saw it, to do what the government won't do, to examine US aircraft to see whether the undertaking that we're told exists and that they are unarmed and not involved in any military action is in fact true. We had a trial, we were issued with a fine which we didn't pay. In defiance of that, we were sent to prison supposedly for a month, but we served about 2 hours of that. The discrepancy, if you like, in their treatment and ours is really regrettable as well, and I think the Irish state bear a huge responsibility for this. It's part of a broader process of trying to appear gung-ho, the big boys of Europe, licking up to the military elite that's now gaining ground globally, curry favour. It's probably part of their process of trying to get onto the UN Security Council. So they're probably in a bit of a bind. I don't know what they hope. They hope the lads will go away. Well, they certainly can't go away without a passport. So this issue is going to remain. And I think we have an obligation to do what we can to highlight their case as best as possible. Because I think if Irish citizens really realise that two elderly war veterans who can make a lie out of the government statements, the lads were living proof that it's a lie because they've been through Shannon and they and their colleagues told us that they had guns with them. So what they were doing was right. It was in the realms of trying to uphold international law, which the Irish government doesn't seem to have any interest in doing whatsoever. So we as legislators, but also Irish people in general, have a real responsibility now to speak out about this case. It's a violation of human rights in a very serious way on our doorstep. The more political pressure that's put on that, the more impact that it will have. Justice delayed is justice denied, and particularly when these people are away from home, it's doubly important that that case will be fast-tracked and that when it is heard that we all stand in solidarity with them. As a member of the Parliament, I think I speak for the overwhelming majority of people who support our neutrality, that we are really grateful to the lads for the stance that they took, and the best tribute we can pay to them is to redouble our efforts to get involved in the campaigns to stop the military use of Shannon.
I'm a veteran of the Irish Defence Forces and have been involved in peacekeeping. We have seen what war does. We have seen the results. We have seen the bodies on the ground. These reports are sanitised in the mainstream media. The reason Veterans for Peace are so committed to preventing war is that they have seen war, been involved in it directly and indirectly. It's hugely important to us here in Ireland that two US veterans would do this. It internationalises the situation. These two gentlemen didn't commit a crime. They were trying to prevent crimes being committed and crimes being facilitated at Shannon Airport. As it happens, the following day after they did their action, 10 children from one extended family were killed in a US airstrike in Afghanistan. It's technically possible that some of the soldiers that went to Shannon Airport were involved directly or indirectly in that attack. We don't know. It's very likely that some soldiers who've gone to Shannon Airport in the past have been involved in crimes against humanity. We here in Ireland are also involved in a separate project called Naming the Children, in which we are attempting to put names on as many children as possible who've been killed in the Middle East since the first Gulf War in 91. And we've come up with a horrific statistic that up to 1 million children have died or been killed as a result of wars in the Middle East, including those children who were killed in 9/11. Our legal system and our court system has been abused quite deliberately to put people off protesting. We are whistleblowers to a very large extent. Clearly, whistleblowing, exposing crime is a very honourable tradition and is covered in our constitution. It's hugely important that our whistleblowing be acknowledged and treated with respect. Two of us went in to do a similar action at Shannon Airport. We attempted to search 2 US military planes. It's going to take 3 years before that comes to trial. This is a deliberate attempt to inconvenience those peace activists as much as possible. This trial can be delayed, as it's quite possible, for 2 or 3 years. Then effectively they're being sentenced to 2 or 3 years away from their home and from their loved ones in the United States. What's happening in Shannon involves complicity in war crimes, crimes against humanity, in which hundreds of thousands and even millions of innocent people have been killed across the Middle East by the Gardaí at Shannon Airport, by the Airport Authority and by our government.
Back in 1916, Ireland stood up against the most powerful military machine in the world at that time. And that's in the Irish tradition. And that's not so long ago. All of that strife is not forgotten today. I know that. It took a great amount of courage, and I think that courage is still in the Irish people. I expect Ireland to stand up to this monstrous entity, which is called U.S. imperialism and U.S. war-making. And I think they can. And if Ireland stands up, it sets an example for the entire world. It is so important. One country standing up and saying, no, we are not going to be part of this. Others will follow. That's why the U.S. and its minions and the people that are making money from, a lot of money is being made from U.S. planes here at Shannon. But that's why they don't want that to happen. It's not only here, but it sets an example for other countries that would like to stand up, and they can do it. It can happen, and people have to start believing in that.
The U.S. is the country that's been pushing hardest for the EU to come up to the 2.5% GDP contribution to the military. The U.S. would rather sit back a little bit, provide weapons, and let Europeans go fight than have Americans go fight. And so we see NATO forces in Afghanistan under our pressure. And with a larger EU armed forces, the U.S. will be applying more pressure for the EU to perform these militaristic roles around the world. The United States military-industrial complex will become the primary vendor to the European army.
We have a policy which says no war on Mother Earth, which connects to war on the environment. It's a real war. It's a bloody business is what it is. And profit is the name of the game. And they are making profit from the death of millions of people. The U.S. has over 800 bases in 80 countries around the world. That's an empire like we've never seen before. And it's a violent empire. There's one purpose of an empire, and that's to extract wealth. And it doesn't matter if you reduce people to poverty or you ruin their country. It's about extracting wealth. So there's two things happening. Horrible climate change, which we're seeing all over the world in the storms and the typhoons, which is definitely going to get worse. And we have the possibility of nuclear war. This is a dangerous game. I mean, it's more than a business of killing. It's a business of potential destruction for all of us, for the human race.
The U.S. military is the largest polluting organization in the world and is condemning the entire planet to death. And that's going to affect everybody. Currently, they're enjoying the bread and circuses, the football games and the television and the pubs and so forth. But we're going to run out of water that you can drink, and the enjoyment will go away. We won't be able to generate the electricity that enables them to sit home and watch the telly. I mean, we are within decades of losing all the material advantages that have been gathered over the years. So people should wake up and get involved and make the governments heed the will and the need of the people rather than the 1/10 of 1% that controls most of the wealth and most of the decision making.
I think every individual has to ask themselves, sincerely, what can I do about this? Because you can do something about it. You can at least not be silent, and you're a better human being, and you feel better.
If more Irish people were made aware of this by speaking to their friends who may not be aware of it, that starts to create a foundation on which resistance can be built.
All the great martyrs who died will haunt the walls of Leinster House and the door, and the souls that never raised till Ireland is free. The lies ain't free till
Well, it's very obvious that we really appreciate what our elderly friends have been able to do. Claire referred to them 3 times as elderly. Okay. All right. So our next speaker is going to be Barry Sweeney. As you've known, he has been our conference planner and has been 10 places all at once. He is a member of the World Beyond War Board of Directors. He's a teacher. He has a background in education and environmentalism, and he will be talking about international solidarity and forms of protest.
So, hello again, everybody. I'll be really more talking about World Beyond War here in Ireland in the days and months to come, the actions we're doing here, the initiatives we're doing here, to make clear how people can get involved. There are very simple ways to get involved, very simple little jobs people can do, even if they don't have much time, even just a little half an hour a week. There really are loads and loads of things that can be done to help make a saner world, and a world that possibly has a longer future than it looks like at the moment. But there's no point. Why should I tell you anyone anything? I can give facts and figures, I can appeal to, and you'll say, oh yeah, I understand that, oh that's a good idea. It's head and heart. If I don't touch your heart, it's just irrelevant to tell you anything. I don't see the point in saying a single solitary thing. I just met these men in Ennis 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. We were called terrorists. Ken and Tarak were called terrorists. And your one said you need to win the hearts and minds of people. I worked in America, she said. You know, and it's true, people in Ireland love America. My mother grew up in America. My uncles live in Florida. I have an American passport. JFK, you name it, Ireland loves America. And anything that's seen as critical to America here is really, really taboo. We got some billboards put up for this conference, but we had to dilute the message. We had to take out the part about US military out of Shannon. We just had to stick with No War 2019, a little nice, clean promotion of the conference. So let me tell you a few things that might catch you in the gut. So, the number one defense of Shannon that I hear from anyone in this country whenever I talk about this thing is the jobs. But sure, it's a lot of jobs, it's good for the region, you know, we're making money. Well, before we helped blow Iraq to smithereens, we had an enormous export industry, or meat export industry to Iraq. Millions of euros every year. It was a huge industry. Zero. Gone. Finished. Doesn't exist. So don't be telling me it makes us money. All of those planes, you look at Ryanair or Delta, or I don't know what airplanes just came on, they all pay fees for every airport. Every plane that lands pays a fee. Not the US Army. The Irish taxpayer. If you're watching this online, do you realise this? We have paid 40 million euros, us, to have this fucking service here. Excuse me. They're not making us money, they're bleeding us of money. That's our meat industry. The entire meat nearly shut down 2 weeks ago here in Ireland. The factory's all closed. So don't be telling me they make us money. They don't make us money at all. And even if they were making us billions, is blood money good? Is that allowed? You know, like for how many centuries did English soldiers come here? I don't think they were particularly bad people, but it was a job. And they came and they killed us. Is that reason enough? Oh, it's a job. Oh, that's fine. It doesn't matter what color the blood is on the money. It's just crazy. And the reality is the government here really wants to scare people. Tarak and Ken are a perfect example. They want to scare people. They want you to think that you have no power. They want you to think that you are an ant. You are nothing. From the WikiLeaks cables that came out, I think it was 2006, I can't remember exactly, we found out that the US government, US Army, actually offered to stop using Shannon. They said, look, there's too many protests, it's too much hassle, we'll go. The Irish government said, no, don't go. We don't want the protesters to know they won. They don't want you to know. We won. And that's the reality. We have the power. Don't listen to their rubbish. We can do anything we want. If you think of any change that's ever happened in the world, like Rosa Parks on the bus in America, that's one woman. And she started a whole entire campaign. You look at the suffragettes in upstate New York, that was 6 women having a cup of tea and a cup of coffee. 6 women. Don't think you're a goddamn man. Don't listen to their crap. You think it's seatbelts in cars. That campaign, that Ralph Nader campaign, not safe at any speed. How many people were in that campaign? Not many. And they took on the car industry, not a small industry, and they won. You look at smoking in airplanes, taking on the airlines. Who was that? That was Ralph Nader again. Any social progress that has ever happened has come from us. It doesn't come from the politicians. They want to keep it the same. If you want to see change, it is up to you to stand up and act. You people here have acted. You have come. You people at home, you need to act. You need to stand up. You need to believe in yourself. You need to know your power. They will do anything. Politicians like their job. They like their lifestyle. They want to keep their lifestyle. They're very practical people. They will do anything for your vote. What you need to do is tell them what you want. In 2003, Ed Horgan, who's sitting here beside us, he took the Irish government to the High Court for the unconstitutional use of Shannon Airport, and he won in the High Court here in Ireland. It was proven to be unconstitutional, and yet they continue. Pressure is needed. So, like, I can tell you all these things, but until you start caring, they will do anything they want. Ireland are trying to get on the United Nations Security Council. You know who's supporting us? Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia. They said, just there, I was reading an article this week, that they like Ireland, this is a direct quote, because we don't lecture. We don't challenge them. You look at 2 years ago, I can't remember, the gassing in Salisbury, and that's it, all Russian ambassadors expelled from in a flash. And a journalist goes in to a Saudi Arabian airport and gets cut to pieces. And like a fortnight later, Simon Coveney says, we're concerned. We didn't kick the Saudis out. There's overwhelming support for Palestine in this country. And yet, the Irish government hasn't recognised the Palestinian state. The Irish government clearly isn't in line with the people of this country. If people want things to happen, they need to get up and move. But the beauty is, like I said at the start, there are really nice, simple ways, safe ways. You don't need to be getting arrested. There are really simple things that we can do. So I'd like to, how am I doing on time? Good. Did you use your cotton tips this morning? You ready? Look, so World Beyond War has 3 pillar campaigns. One is education. And there's lots of really simple things, like you take it, 3% of military spending would end starvation on Earth. Maybe you want to help get that message out there. Maybe you want to set up talks. You want to share it on Facebook, whatever it might be. Maybe you want to highlight the damage, the ecological damage and the links with war. Maybe you want to highlight the job losses like the meat industry here in Ireland, the financial waste. We have just signed up to PESCO. That's a $6 billion a year commitment. 10 years ago, we had the financial meltdown, and our entire bailout was $63 billion. And we heard nothing about that for years. Austerity, cutting jobs, we don't have the money. And we just, like $6 billion a year, think about it. Every decade, that's another bailout. Is that more teachers' jobs gone? Is that more nurses' jobs gone? I have a cousin, he just broke his neck a month ago. He's in hospital, he's paralysed. He was in the specialist hospital in Dublin about 10 days, and he was just beginning to move his little finger. And they told him they'd go put him in a general hospital back in Donegal in a ward with 30 people with non-specialist nurses because there's only 7 beds in the country for broken backs. 7! There's 6 billion for war, though. There's no boots for the soldiers, the peacekeepers in Ireland. There's no resources for the schools, money for war. If this stuff doesn't drive you crazy, then I just don't understand anything. Look, education, you take it here in Ireland, we have a thing called transition year. That's the first year of the senior cycle when you're 16 years old. The schools don't have to cover much of the curriculum, a very small amount of the curriculum. They have huge, they can take on any course they want. You want to do social work, work experience, they can take on any courses in that particular year. Permaculture is in the 4th year of a pilot project. At the moment, sustainability is now getting into the senior cycle. We can get a peace module put in there. We can have secondary school students here in Ireland studying peace. There's 60,000 students in Ireland in every year. So you take it, the guys who do the leaving cert here when they reach 18, 60,000. Do that for 5 years. That's 300,000 voters. We have 3 million voters in Ireland. That's already 10% of the vote right there. And they'll be voting, like they're 16, they'll be voting in 2 years. We could get a course in there. We need to link the course to the curriculum. We need to find a friendly principal. We need a school to say, okay, we'll help you with the pilot project. Once it's through that 5 years, it is there that any school in the whole country can do it. That's a great project. Maybe you want to be involved in that. What are you doing? You're just calling a few schools. This isn't hard work. There's divestment, so there's education, there's divestment. Like you take it, there's 3 billion euros made in arms. Well, not in arms, I'm wrong to say that. In microchips that are used in arms. And there is research done on it, but it's a little bit old. We need new research on that. Maybe you've always wanted to do a master's. Well, there's a research master's for you. Go research some institutions, research some universities, research some companies, so that we can start protesting against them. Again, not difficult to do. Divestment is the easiest thing in the world to do. You call your bank and you say, come here, I actually want you guys to do ethical banking. Are you involved in investing in munitions, arms, wars? Get it out, or I'm closing my account. Takes 5 minutes. We can get the money out of the banks. We can get the money out of the death industry. Divestment, it's easy. You can do this from your own home. You don't need to put your family at risk. These guys are amazing. Our third one is about closing bases. I won't say too much about that because Ed and John are here. And Shannon isn't actually a base, so it's a little bit particular. So I won't talk much about closing bases, but we do want to end the use of Shannon. One thing that is definitely important for me to say, I live in Sicily, doing all this from abroad is difficult, and I definitely need help. I just can't do all this from abroad. It's very easy. Just send us an email, info@WorldBeyondWar.org, and we can set up a monthly phone call, and you can say, Barry, I'd like to help with some Facebook sharing. Okay, we can figure out the time you have, the energy you have, the skills you have, and we'll find something appropriate. I'm going to wrap up with a conversation I had with Tarak in the car yesterday. He said, John said to him, it's great, when we kind of get to this age, we don't have as much to lose, that you can take on these actions. And Tarak said, well, we might all be dead in 10 years. Look at the state of the climate. He said, what the fuck are you waiting for?
I think Barry needs to run for office. Our next speaker is John Lannan. John is a lecturer and researcher in the Human Rights and Development Practice Research Group at the University of Limerick. He is a founding member of Shannon Watch, and he co-edited Shannon Airport and 20th Century War with Roger Cole of PANA. And he will be speaking about monitoring political lobbying, media work, including social media.
Thanks, Leah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm afraid I'm going to take the liberty of talking about other stuff as well, so I hope you don't mind. I know. But then I went to another conference yesterday, so I missed a lot of what was on here. It was the conference of the movement of asylum seekers in Ireland, MASI they're called, and they were reflecting on 5 years of asylum seekers organising to oppose something called direct provision, seeking to end this. This is a temporary system of accommodation that's put in place, or has been put in place, for asylum seekers and refugees here in Ireland. It's actually a temporary arrangement that was set up back in 2000, which was about a year and a half before another temporary arrangement. And that other temporary arrangement was the use of Shannon Airport for the transit of US troops over to the Middle East for the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. So I suppose the first lesson for us here, and probably for every place in the world, is don't accept temporary arrangements, right? Yeah. I mean, we did try to stop the temporary arrangement in Shannon. We did have 100,000 people out in the streets in Dublin to oppose the invasion of Iraq. The problem is that didn't succeed. So I suppose the second lesson then is don't expect the government to obey the will of the people, you know, unless they've no alternative. So what do we do about this? I mean, we could, of course, and should elect a left-wing government that puts the interests of society and of people, ordinary people, first. That would be good. Okay, but if we go back to the MASI conference, so there were a couple of us who are here today, were there yesterday, and we're there in solidarity with the people who are affected by the wars that we're supporting. We were there, you know, they deserve sanctuary, they deserve protection here in Ireland, in countries like Ireland, and they don't get it. Now, I was particularly struck by a phrase that Robert Fisk made, the journalist in Padder's film last night, when he said that the refugees are not seen as having rights. He was speaking in the context of Lebanon. It's the very same here in Ireland. We don't respect the rights of people who are fleeing from war, fleeing from persecution, fleeing from the devastation of climate change. People spend years waiting for a decision on their application for international protection in the system here in Ireland. The government doesn't provide proper accommodation for them. The government doesn't provide access to healthcare. The government doesn't provide education. It doesn't provide anything. Another problem we have is that the far right are on the rise here, sadly, in Ireland as well. And that's because of government silence, government inaction. And of course, the people that are most affected by this are asylum seekers and refugees. Now, ironically, of course, the far right also claim to be opposed to military interventions around the world, or at least the ones we have here in Ireland are. But they're not our allies. We have to remember this. They do not care about peace. They do not care about justice. And we can see that clearly from their actions. Now, our government is very good at breaking laws, actually. It's good in terms of asylum seekers. We're breaking what's called the EU Reception Conditions Directive for refugees. If we think in terms of Shannon, we're facilitating the breaching of a whole range of laws there. Okay, so there's the humanitarian stuff, like the Geneva Convention, in terms of the war crimes and the devastation that's being caused by the troops that are going through Shannon. There's the human rights stuff, like the Convention Against Torture, which is enshrined in Irish law, but we've had rendition planes going through Shannon. There's neutrality, the Hague Convention. Even on the aviation front, they're breaching their own laws, because there's a thing called the Air Navigation and Transport Act Carriage of Munitions Order, and that's been breached on a wholesale basis as well by the US military. But there's a problem, because Irish people don't seem to either know about this or care enough about this, and this is the work that we need to do. And of course, Ireland is also now an enthusiastic supporter of the European defence and security policy. Actually, it should probably be named the aggression and instability policy, I think, because that would be more accurate, wouldn't it? And we also, of course, the other big word that we talk about is integration. But what Europe and the US is doing is promoting disintegration, isn't it? It's promoting disintegration of communities around the world. It's promoting disintegration of countries. It's promoting disintegration of entire regions. It's promoting the disintegration of the planet, right, isn't it? That's what's happening now. But again, the question, do people care? Well, what's interesting is that people care about stuff that affects them. It was interesting yesterday that there were, well, depending on who you read, there were either between 2,500 and 6,000 people on the streets of Limerick to oppose the building of a big polluting incinerator less than a mile from here. You can see it, the building outside the front of this hotel. There were people out, and they were right to oppose that. Young people demanded marriage equality over recent years here in Ireland. Young people demanded the rights of women to choose what to do with their own bodies. They were right to make those demands. And even better, they were successful in making those demands. And we need to learn from that. We need to start making this stuff relevant. People don't see war as relevant, sadly, here in Ireland. They don't see it as relevant to their daily lives. They should, of course. They should, but they don't. So how do we make peace? How do we make anti-war activism relevant for people here in Ireland? Or as Ken put it, make them wake up and see what's going on. How do we do that? We've been working on the obvious over the last 2 decades almost in Shannon Watch and in various guises since 2002 to try to get the US military out of Shannon. But you know, and that's really important. But again, going back to that Massey conference yesterday, I was having a conversation with a good friend and activist yesterday, and she said that, you know, the real problem for asylum seekers in Ireland isn't direct provision per se. It isn't the accommodation. It's the whole international protection system and the failure of government to deal fairly with applications. And it's a bit like that with Shannon as well. You know, the real problem isn't whether soldiers have or haven't got ammunition with them as they're going through Shannon. The real problem isn't whether neutrality is or isn't enshrined in our constitution. Or the problem is that our government is lying to us about these things. So, and also the other big problem, of course, is that the government thinks it's okay to increase their support for global aggression in order to secure resources, to access to markets, all of that stuff. And as Mairead pointed out earlier, it's, you know, they're claiming it's about freedom and it's about democracy and it's about human rights. But again, they're lying to us. And our government here in Ireland thinks it's okay not to, or to avoid criticising the world's largest terrorist, the US and the US Army, and saying nothing about this, you know, because they think that it will impact on our corporate investment. You know, this great lie again that we're told. So what do we do about all of this? This is the problem, isn't it? You know, and let me just talk about a few of the things that we are doing in Shannon or have been over the years. One of them is, and here thankfully I will get back to what I said I was going to talk about, Leah, about monitoring and recording all of the landings at Shannon. We have data going back to 2008 about every plane that landed in Shannon. It will be useful. It will be important someday. It's very important in the meantime just to be able to track and to expose what is really happening there. We photograph a lot of them, or I should say Ed here photographs a lot of them because he puts a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of effort into that, and it is really important. Witnessing and acknowledging and explaining what is happening and exposing that. And we do that. We highlight as much as we can with our limited resources what's going on at Shannon. Social media helps, although unless you can get something trending on Twitter, you know, it's not all that successful. But I am always assured, I think, by the fact that I know that government officials read the stuff that we write. I know that when stuff goes to the mainstream media, even though they don't publish it, it still gets read by somebody before it gets thrown in the bin or the wastebasket. So it's worth doing it. It's always worth doing it because somebody somewhere is reading it, and that drip feeding of information and awareness is really important. I must say that I admire David's work online, because the two things, so quality matters in terms of what you produce, quantity matters as well. David does both, and I wish we could do the same here in Shannon as well with Shannon Watch, but I'm taking lessons from you on that. The other thing that matters is, and that we do, is regular ongoing protest. So we're going out there this afternoon. That's good. We do it the second Sunday of every month. It has become a bit like a religious experience at this time. You know, we've been doing it since early January 2008, I think. For 1 hour, we're there. Now, very often there are more Gardaí, more police there than there are activists. But, you know, again, they've got to notice us. We get support from people as they drive past, even if they don't stop to spend time with us. And we do use the mechanisms that are available to us in terms of lobbying, you know, available at national, international level to hold the government, to hold the authorities accountable. I think Ed might speak a bit more about that. We also, of course, do direct action, which I think Ed will speak a bit more about as well, because that opens the doors to the courts, of course. The problem is that it does come at a price, as Ken and Tarak know, because they're unable to return back to the United States to their families. So that is something that we always have to be mindful of. But one of the key things for me is to have a range of tactics. We always need that. And we need to work together to put them to best effect. Right now, you know, I think the thing to do is to join with our friends and colleagues that are tackling the climate crisis and working on that, Extinction Rebellion and so on, and to demonstrate, as others have mentioned, that endless war isn't, well, it's actually not just about destroying the planet. It is destroying the planet, but it's also making our capacity to cope with the climate crisis a whole lot harder, because so it affects us in many ways. And the other thing then, just to finish up with another sort of thought to leave you with, is that we need to know that our campaign against war is the struggle of ordinary people everywhere in the world. You know, it's a struggle for justice, it's a struggle for freedom. And it's freedom from oppression for the Palestinian people. It's freedom from the barbarism of dictators like Assad. It's freedom from US warmongering. It's freedom from homelessness in Ireland. It's a campaign of advocacy. It's a campaign of awareness raising. And it's a campaign of solidarity. So we need to work together to speak the truth. And the key thing is that knowing what's going on, what's happening, is everybody's responsibility. And I'm just going to finish with a quote actually from the Massey conference again yesterday, because it's really important to us here as well, or just as relevant, if I can find it. Yes, it was from a sociologist and activist, Evgeny Storm, and he said, "Knowledge is the responsibility and the obligation of citizens." And that we have to know, and we have to keep that in our minds. He said, people need to know, he said, what is happening today in this country. And that's our challenge, and that's what we need to keep doing. Make sure people know what's going on. Then we'll get the change we need. Thank you.
Our last but not least speaker is Ed Horgan. Ed retired from the Irish Defence Forces with the rank of Commandant after 22 years. He has extensive work in election monitoring all over the world. He's also involved with PANA. He, as was mentioned, he once sued Ireland and was arrested I'm sorry. I went on to this next thing he did, which I'm really impressed with. He tried to arrest George Bush in 2004, and I wish he'd been successful, but anyway. Ed is going to be speaking about direct action, legal issues, submissions to national and international bodies, plans for events at Shannon, and especially wants to talk about children.
Thank you very much. Some people tell me I speak too quickly, which of course is true. So if I'm speaking too quickly, you'll just have to listen more quickly, won't you? The title of this session is Plans for Shannon and Ireland Today and in the Days to Come. We should expand on this title. We are no longer alone. The challenges are not just about Shannon or Ireland or Europe. The challenges are global. But Shannon and Ireland represent the local symptoms of the diseases that are wars, human rights abuses, environmental destruction, all driven by short-term human greed. This weekend I was multitasking in a big way, apart from trying to set up the Shannon Peace Camp. On Friday night and Saturday morning I was minding 3 of my grandchildren, 3 mischievous, healthy boys. The contrast between the well-being of my grandchildren and the suffering of millions of children in the Middle East is huge. So I want to make children the theme of my short talk, and also, hopefully, the theme of our visit to Shannon in the afternoon. Why children? Well, they are the future of humanity, if they are to have a future. Ireland, by allowing the US to use Shannon Airport, is actively complicit in the deaths of up to 1 million children across the Middle East due to Middle East wars since the first Gulf War in 1991. Stalin is reputed to have said, "One man's death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths are just statistics." This is a common human response, and it's partly psychological protection for our minds. We can cope with individual tragedies, but our minds seek to blot out the reality of larger disasters. This is helped by cynical public relations exercises by military forces and governments. The killing of civilians are just collateral damage, and militarily necessary, of course, rather than the truth of unjustified atrocities. Stuff happens, I think, as Donald Rumsfeld once said. I will just cite one story to emphasize the reality of the deaths in these Middle East wars. In September 2017, I visited Syria on a fact-finding mission with other Irish peace activists, connected, in my case, with our Naming the Children project. 6 months previously, on the 15th of April 2017, at least 80 children were killed in a horrific suicide bombing of a bus convoy at Al-Rashidin near Aleppo. The buses carrying civilian evacuees from the besieged government-controlled towns of Al-Fua and Kafria were guarded by rebel fighters. The convoy appeared to have been deliberately delayed before entering government-controlled areas. A car stopped near the bus convoy and began distributing sweets and crisps to the children from the buses who had been starving for the previous 2 years. When they flocked around the car, the driver, who was a suicide bomber, activated a massive car bomb which contained a huge amount of flammable explosives and liquids also. ISIS killing 80 children and at least 46 adults. Many of them, including the survivors, suffered huge burns. ISIS claimed responsibility. 6 months later, we met a group of survivors from this dreadful bus bombing. One young teenage boy explained how he had lost friends and family members. A grandmother in her 70s, who was still obviously traumatized and in tears, told us she had lost 7 members of her immediate family. Yet she was thanking us for coming to Syria to hear her story, and it was a deeply humbling experience for all of us. Those who committed this atrocity were directly or indirectly supported, armed and funded by the US and its European, and including European Union and Middle Eastern allies, in their attempts to overthrow the government of Syria in gross breach of the UN Charter and international law. Ireland and Shannon Airport facilitated and are still facilitating this and other war crimes. The US could not commit the crimes it is committing in the Middle East without the active support and complicity of most European countries, including Ireland. If we can take Ireland out of this axis of evil, then others may follow suit. At Shannon Airport, we peace activists use a variety of strategies and methods. Our first purpose is as whistleblowers to inform the Irish people what is happening in Shannon Airport so that the Irish people themselves can take some action. Our next strategy is to do something about it, if at all possible. And our long-term objective is to end US military use of Shannon Airport and restore Irish neutrality. All our actions are non-violent peace actions. To do otherwise would be to join the warmongers or to play into their schemes whereby they could label us as terrorists and justify violence against us and others. I define violence as injury to persons or other living creatures, and I distinguish between violence and damage to inanimate property. Violence is never justified, Damage to property is sometimes necessary and justified in order to prevent people being injured and killed by violence. Usually, at Shannon, our regular peace vigils are both non-violent and avoid damage to property. And today's peace rally at Shannon will fall into that category. So we don't expect you to go out and damage the US military plane or go to the fence or whatever. On other occasions, some of us do what are called arrestable actions. This is sort of a double think on our behalf. The police think that they're dragging us through the courts, but in reality, we are dragging them and the state through the courts as our way of exposing the wrongdoings. Leah mentioned earlier on that I attempted to arrest George Bush. It was a stunt to expose the fact that he wasn't welcome at Shannon Airport, and as such, it worked quite well. Such arrestable actions are not for the faint-hearted, and we do not expect everyone to do them, although there are no reasons why all of you couldn't do so. If Margaret Darcy in her 80s and quite ill with several serious illnesses could negotiate the barricades and the fences in Shannon Airport and brought the airport to a standstill on 2 occasions by going on the runway, then anyone can do it, but not necessarily today. Right now, we have 6 peace activists before the courts who are dragging the states through the courts, including Ken and Tarak. Again, they are being treated, as was mentioned, far more severely because their passports are being held. Dave Donnellan and Colin Roddy, who is in the audience, are also before the courts for similar actions, and Dan Dowling and a guy called Horgan are still before the courts. Some of us are accused of the heinous crime of writing graffiti on the engine of a US warplane. Can you imagine who would do such a terrible thing? I have no idea who might have done it. And finally, I have here lists of some of the 1 million children who have been killed in the Middle East. This file in particular contains some of these children we've managed to find names for in Syria. It contains the names or indications of children who've been killed, of 10,034 children killed in Syria alone. And that is only the names we could find. Many more have died in Yemen in particular, in Iraq especially. The figures for Iraq are well in excess of 500,000. In fact, during the sanctions in Iraq during the 1990s, imposed by the UN at the behest of the US, at least 500,000 children died directly as a result of these sanctions. And this is horrific. And some of you are probably aware that when US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was asked, well, Ms. Albright, Secretary of State, was it worth the cost of 500,000 children? And she thought about it and said, yes, it was. More recently, I discovered that Madeleine Albright was a keynote speaker at an Amnesty International talk in New York. They didn't seem to know her history, or if they knew, they ignored it. Right now, and finally, I don't usually quote the Bible. It seems to have gone out of fashion in recent times anyway, and morality has also been thrown out the window by many in modern society. I recall in the New Testament one of the few times that Jesus got really angry. He's reported to have said, "Suffer little children to come unto me. If anyone scandalizes one of these, my little ones, it were better that a millstone be tied around his neck and he be hurled into the depths of the sea." Right now, the European Union, including Ireland, have deliberately stopped rescuing drowning migrants and refugees from the sea in the Mediterranean. They choose knowingly to let them drown. And those they pull out of the sea, the minority, they send back to Libya, to concentration camps in dreadful conditions. We don't have enough millstones to tie around the necks of our European leaders and politicians, unfortunately. So we need, maybe just a final comment. Some previous speakers emphasised issues of identity, and I would say I come from County Kerry, so I'm a Kerry man. I come from Ireland, I'm an Irishman. I come from Europe, I am a European. But most of all, I come from planet Earth. And my identity is first and foremost, and will always be, partly because I've worked in well over 20 different countries. I am a citizen of humanity. And that is far more important than my Irishness, my Kerryness, and my Europeanness. we must we all live in one world, and we must create a world without war, a world beyond war. Thank you very much. See you at the barricades. Resist.
I have a couple questions that were from panel before last. So bring up the new ones, and I'll ask these right now. There was one that says, let's see, while in Limerick, I was told by a woman that during President Obama, Shannon was used a lot for refueling, but now that Trump's in office, it's used less. Is that true? Is it true? You go ahead and respond.
Have I figured out the microphone? I have, I think. Yeah, the numbers are down slightly. They vary. So there are two types of planes that come through Shannon that we're interested in, just very briefly. So we have military planes, which are the US Air Force, the US Navy, the US military. And then we have military contracted planes, companies like Omni Air International, who basically take money from the Department of State to ferry troops back and forth around the world. We get both coming through Shannon. The numbers of the troop carriers have dipped a little bit this year, but are broadly speaking similar to what they were over the last few years. I think it was 2005 when the troop numbers through Shannon were at their height at about 340 or 50,000. They're down to about 60,000 a year now, which in some respects makes our job a little bit more difficult, because as the numbers go down, it's less visible and it's harder to oppose it. But it's still participation in US warmongering, so we have to continue. Actually, the figures are all in this, or figures from a couple of years back are all in our booklet, the ones that Roger and I put together, so you'll get them in there. They're actually up until about 2015, I think.
There's another microphone in the middle of the table. And there's, yeah, so.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Just for information, yesterday there happened to be a US military plane at Shannon Airport. The US Air Force, its number was 20102. We took a photograph of it, and Barry and some of the other folks went down to Shannon Garda Station, made a complaint, asked the Gardaí Shannon Airport to search and investigate that plane, which of course they didn't do, but that's part of our standard procedure.
In fact, I went in to make the report. I don't need a microphone. No, you do. Okay. I went into the Garda station. I said I wanted to make the report. They gave me the form rather begrudgingly. And I asked for a pen, and he said, "Well, this isn't a library." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm trying to make a complaint. I'm trying to make a report." And he said, "That's right. I'm not trying to take it. You're trying to make it." He didn't give me a pen. Like, I might have just been mugged or something else. You know, like it's a very minor obstruction of justice, but he didn't. I had to go get a pen and write it out and come back. And the other fellow who was with me, he said, "I'll do one as well." He said, "Well, we can't be photocopying for everyone. It's not a library, I told you." You know, we continued. He did photocopy it in the end, but you know, that's how helpful they are in reporting a crime. You know, that's the state of it. It's coming from higher than just, you know, that ordinary dude at the window. It's not actually his call, but the more they can ignore, the better. You know, and that's just the straight truth of it.
Also, recently, I happened to be at Shannon Airport. I photographed a plane owned by a company called Western Global, which I knew did some US military work. I went on the internet and checked, and eventually found out that it was coming from the Middle East. It had more than likely had been delivering. It was on a US military contract. It was now coming back to Ireland. An hour or two after I had photographed it, it took off from Shannon Airport, developed an emergency, had to make an emergency landing. It dumped something like 10,000 litres of aviation fuel, probably over the land in the west of Ireland, before landing. The first time I tried to land, it had a missed landing and took off again. That's the second significant incident in recent weeks involving US planes in Shannon Airport. We also have problems with the use of a type of foam for firefighting, which is carcinogenic, that is banned in many other countries, including European Union countries, but still being used not only by Irish airports, but also by some Irish local authorities. So we are exporting this sort of stuff as well, some directly related to Shannon and some indirectly. But there are significant problems for safety at Shannon Airport for the people using the airport, in addition to the reality that many of these planes are most likely carrying large amounts of explosives. If one of those planes carrying munitions and explosives went on fire in Shannon Airport, the only option for the firefighters at Shannon Airport would be to turn around quickly and go at least a mile away from the plane as the explosive literally cooked off, and the people in the terminal building could well be terminated. So there are huge dangers. Shannon Airport is a civilian airport, not designed like military airports are to deal with huge explosions if an Air Force plane crashes, and that is just one of the issues in addition to all the people being killed in the Middle East.
I have a short question here that I can answer. It said, the person said that they can hear an increased amount of plane activity in the Dublin-Wicklow area, and are these military planes on their way to UK military bases? And I would say I really doubt that, because the purpose is to be refueled from the States to Afghanistan, so it wouldn't make any sense to go from Shannon just to the UK, so I wouldn't think so. Were you handed other questions? Because these are all I have. Okay, so John, you want to go ahead?
Yes, so I have a question here. It says, Assad is not the dictator. He's the victim of the dictatorship of imperialism. Do you not think it's better to bring solidarity to the aggressed? Yes, absolutely, we bring solidarity to the aggressed and to the oppressed. But Assad, the victim? Yeah, I've Syrian friends who would see things a bit differently. You know, and imperialism certainly has contributed or exacerbated the problem and what's going on in Syria. You know, we have the uninvited imperialists, America. We have, I suppose you could call them the invited imperialists, Russia. But you know, for me, you know, war crimes, human rights abuses are wrong, regardless of who's committing them, and that's where I stand. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
I'm sorry.
I would say, can I just say that I would agree with what Mairead said earlier, that we may have different views here on this and on within our movement. I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone about this afterwards.
Are there any Irish artists that support the fight against the U.S. use of Shannon? Anybody know?
Yes, in fact, yeah, I'm actively involved at the moment in a project called Naming the Children. We are attempting to put names on as many as possible of the children who have died across the Middle East, and also people who have died of terrorist attacks, including 9/11 and in Paris and elsewhere. At the moment, we have 20 artists in North Donegal who are painting pictures of 20 of the selected children who have died from different countries, and there will be an expedition of these paintings. Most of them have already been painted, and I've seen some of them in the Yards Monastery in North Donegal, I think on the 25th of October next. So yes, there are artists who are involved, and quite a few in the anti-war movement in Dublin and elsewhere, but particularly at the moment in North Donegal, and we will be publicising more on this later, and it's connected with the Naming the Children project, trying to find ways of identifying them and to bring them out of the category of collateral damage and to find suitable ways of commemorating them. But we do get good support from artists in various fields, including musicians and others, and we thank them for that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Musicians. Poets, musicians.
Yes, poets, musicians, painters, whatever, and yeah, we do get good support.
Okay. Yes, John, please, yes.
Angie, I think you mentioned, and one artist that we should give credit to here. Unfortunately, she's not with us today. She was here yesterday, Pauline Goggin, who did this artwork here and has been a fantastic supporter of the movement.
And particularly good support from the Quaker community in Ireland and elsewhere, as we would expect from the Defence Society.
I'm sorry, it's 1:15. We were supposed to end at 1:15, and I know people wanted to see the short video that John Ruhr had from Sudan. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. If you want to stay to watch the video, right after this is lunch right next door, and then at 2:15, the buses will be loading, or bus I think will be loading up to go to the protest. If you have a vehicle and you can offer a ride, that would be much appreciated as well. David, are there any other things I need to mention?
Leah.
There's also a short video from Italy that was going to be shown during lunch, so maybe at least 2 short videos.
Okay, I didn't know about that.
Leah.
Okay, 2 videos.
Leah,